Okay, we are continuing our look at the depth charts of Premier League teams ahead of the season's restart. The Community Shield is next week, believe it or not. So football is right back on the radar. And I'm delighted to say that we are turning our attention to Arsenal, and we are joined today by Andrew Mangan of Arseblog. Andrew, how are you getting on?
Not too bad, thanks. How's yourself?
Very well, thank
Good.
you. So we're going to be chatting a little bit over the next little while about what players Arsenal should bring in, what areas they need to target. But I think it's as interesting as anything right now to chat about how Arsenal are recruiting. And people will have seen last week that Raul Sanllehi has left the building. So what does that tell us about how Arsenal are recruiting at the moment?
I think it tells us there's a bit of a gap in terms of how the process is going to work, or at least a gap in our knowledge of how the process is going to work. I suppose the thing we should point out before we talk about the departure of Raul Sanllehi as head of football is that the previous week or maybe 10 days previously, they basically dismantled their scouting operation. So the head of international recruitment, who was basically the de facto head of recruitment, a guy called Francis Kajigao, left. The head of UK scouting left. Brian McDermott, the former Reading manager, who was high up in the UK scouting setup, he also left. And I think the scouts in Spain, Italy, France, Germany, all the big European markets were let go. So it suggests that something different is going on. There's talk of a more data-led approach, but certainly if speaking to people at Arsenal, when it comes to recruitment, a lot of those people have felt a bit marginalized in recent times as well, because it felt like all the deals Arsenal were doing were done at board level, basically, or at executive level. A small collection of agents were involved in the players who were coming into the club. I think 3 of the last 4 permanent signings have been clients of one particular agent. So right now, we don't quite know what's going to happen if Sanllehi's departure is going to change things in terms of how Arsenal process their recruitment. We'll just have to wait and see. I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens between now and the end of the window.
Because one of Sanllehi's downfalls, I'd imagine, was just how loyal, I guess, he was to his manager, and his loyalty to Unai Emery, I guess, could be seen as a criticism. So maybe there was a factor in that in his departure, or maybe that soured the atmosphere a little bit. It certainly feels to me that we never got a full outcome on how successful Sanllehi was going to be at Arsenal.
Well, look, I think he has had 2 years basically as head of football, and whatever concerns people might have had about the way players were coming into the club and the people who were involved in those deals, if you look at the overall performance of the club while he's been in charge, there was a decline. I think everyone could see there was a decline at the end of the Arsene Wenger era. But he hasn't done anything, or he didn't do anything, I think we should say, obviously, because he's gone. He didn't do anything to arrest that decline. In fact, it got steeper. Arsenal just about scraped into 8th place on the final day of the Premier League season. Winning the FA Cup was fantastic, a brilliant achievement, and something that was hugely enjoyable. But without that, Arsenal would not have been in Europe for the first time in over 25 years. So even just leaving recruitment aside, I think if you were looking at the work that Sanllehi was doing and how it was being reflected in Arsenal's performances on the pitch and in the Premier League, it doesn't really stand up to a great deal of scrutiny.
Do you have confidence in this new model then, that if it is going to be more of an agents-led process, that better results can be found?
Well, no, I hope it's not really an agents-led process. I think Arsenal need to embrace all the aspects of recruitment. That includes agents. Relationships with agents are good, of course, but you need also to have good video analysis, data, scouting. All of those things combined give you this, I don't want to use the word holistic approach to recruitment because it just sounds a bit, bit marketing speak, whatever it might be. But, I think you have to use all the elements that are available to you as a modern football club, all the data, all the stats, all the knowledge that's available, combined with scouting, combined with maybe a bit of insider knowledge, combined with, having an agent who might be able to help you get a deal done. All of those things, I think, are the right way for any modern football club to recruit. So, like I said, we'll see what's going to happen. Obviously, Mikel Arteta is going to be a lot more involved now with technical director Edu, who's got some question marks over him as well because of how close he was to the previous setup. He needs to prove some people wrong, I think. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens. Maybe not so much this window, because I think a lot of the plans they have in place would have been it's very difficult at the last minute to pivot to something completely different. But going forward, next January, next summer, seeing how they do things and the way they do things will be very interesting.
For sure. So for anybody who's just joining us and missed our Liverpool depth chart earlier this week, it's very simple. It is what it says in the tin. We're going to go position by position and see how Arsenal are stacked basically today in each position. We'll start with the front three, Andrew, because this is as interesting a position as you can get with Arsenal. There's no question who the number one talent is in this department. On a percentage scale, how likely and how confident are you that Aubameyang and his deal is going to get sorted, say, this week or before the Community Shield?
I'm pretty confident, actually. I think it's from what people are saying, it's pretty much done. So it's just a matter of it being announced. Obviously, things can change, but I do think he is going to stay. I think he's been very encouraged by working with Mikel Arteta. I think he's going to be very encouraged by a very healthy pay rise at 31 years of age and a nice contract. I think that's par for the course. When you've got a world-class talent like him, you've got to pay what it takes to keep him. So I think that's going to be a big part of what makes for a successful summer for Arsenal. I think he's going to stay, and then there are obviously players around him, Nicolas Pepe, Alexandre Lacazette, who I think might just be on the way out. It wouldn't surprise me if he were to leave, but they've brought in Willian, of course, from Chelsea. And there's good young talent there as well. Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli, Reece Nelson, players who can provide some depth in that front three. So I think it's probably the area, once Aubameyang signs, it's the area of the pitch that Arsenal have the least to worry about.
They're quite stacked. So with everybody fully fit, with, let's assume Lacazette is staying at the club, and let's assume that Martinelli is fully fit, what is your front three? Who are number 2 and 3 in this depth chart for the forwards?
Well, I mean, I think at 31 years of age, you have to protect a player's physicality, and a goal scorer like Aubameyang does not need to be chasing up and down the left wing to be tracking fullbacks. It's not to say he won't do it and doesn't do it. He does. He's a very committed player. But I think if you're looking to get 3 years out of a guy at that age, you have to make a decision about where you're going to play him. I would play him as Arsenal's central striker. I think Nicolas Pepe will play from the right-hand side, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Willian played quite regularly from the left-hand side. Martinelli is out until the new year with an injury. Saka can play over there as well. My suspicion is that Lacazette will go, and I think that then opens the door for Aubameyang to play as the central striker. So they have options. Willian can play from the right as well. So there's a bit of versatility there. And if Lacazette goes, and I know Eddie Nketiah is very highly thought of at Arsenal, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a signing of a striker to back up Aubameyang.
What sort of caliber striker are we talking about? I guess the Lacazette thing makes perfect sense the way you're talking. If the Nketiah hype is real within the club, and Aubameyang's going to be playing as a central striker, if you can offload that amount of money on the wage bill, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to go out and spend massive money on an established striker. I think they might look at somebody, on the cusp of making a breakthrough in their career. I know they have a close eye on the guy at Celtic, Edouard.
Hudson Edouard.
They've got some eyes on him, and in terms of the profile of the player and his age and what he might cost and what he might develop into, I would suspect if there's a striker signing, it'll certainly be something more along those lines, rather than somebody 26, 27, 28 who's going to cost quite a lot of money, because I think Arsenal have got to use their money in other areas first.
One of those areas might be midfield, which is where we'll move to next. This is not one where I can throw out an Aubameyang at you here. You're going to have to do the work on this one a little bit, I think. What is Arsenal starting midfield? What are you looking at if you had to power rank their midfielders?
Well, look, I think there are big issues here in midfield. Matteo Guendouzi looks like his time at Arsenal is over. So he's very much in the departure land. Departure lounge, I should say, as is Lucas Torreira, I think, because there are strong suggestions that he might go back to Italy. Dani Ceballos is somebody that Arsenal want to keep or bring back on loan from Real Madrid. Whether that's going to happen or not is another question. I think that's up in the air at the moment. So as it stands, the only central midfield player that you can really rely on from an Arsenal point of view is Granit Xhaka as a senior one. And there's Joe Willock, of course, who's coming through as well and played 40-odd games last season, Joe Willock. But again, he's still only 20 and maybe not quite ready to be a first-team regular at Arsenal. So this is an area where I think there is a lot for Arsenal to do in terms of making decisions on Guendouzi and Torreira. Do you sell them and bring in the money and have a target that you're going to bring in to play alongside Xhaka or maybe to replace Xhaka? I don't quite know. I'm as up in the air about midfield as you are. It just strikes me that there are so many question marks over so many players. Mesut Ozil, of course, as well, didn't feature at all after the lockdown, didn't play a single minute, and there's been a lot of talk about what the future might hold for him. But of course, there has to be a question mark over whether he's going to play. So this is an area where I think Arsenal have got a lot of thinking to do. And you would hope, I suppose, as a central midfield player in his day, Mikel Arteta has got a clear idea of what he wants and who he wants for that area of the pitch. Right now, it's very difficult to know who is going to play on the opening day of the season with the squad as it stands.
Is there a world in which Mesut Ozil reconciles the situation at Arsenal whatsoever?
Your guess is as good as mine, to be honest. I don't really understand why he's been out of the team. Clearly, something is going on in the background that we're not aware of. Mikel Arteta knows him very well, former teammate. He knows that, as a team, as a squad, Arsenal lack creativity. And yet he hasn't used Mesut Ozil or didn't use Mesut Ozil at all after the lockdown. Arsenal won an FA Cup without Mesut Ozil. His agent has been very clear to say he's not going anywhere, and you could read that in two ways. One might be that take him at face value. He is literally not going anywhere. The other one might be, well, pay us what we're going to earn and we'll go somewhere else. It might well be that. It's just impossible to say. It's been a soap opera. I do feel it's one that needs to be resolved one way or the other. Either, get value for money from him as a player or move on. But as seems to be the case with Mesut Ozil, a lot is easier said than done.
It's such a shame, really, from Arsenal's point of view, because it does feel like ancient history at this point. But when he is on the pitch, with the exception of Aubameyang, he is clearly a cut above everybody else when it comes to pure talent.
Yeah, I mean, nobody. I don't think anybody has ever really doubted the talent. There is clearly no doubt about the talent. He is an exceptional footballer on his day. The unfortunate thing for Arsenal is that those days are so infrequent. And there are myriad reasons as to why that might be the case. Some of them collective, some of them personal, individual maybe. But what's true is that Arsenal have very rarely seen the best of Mesut Ozil in the last couple of years.
Is a starting midfield for the Community Shield looking like something like Xhaka, Saka, and then one of Willock or Torreira? Is that essentially what you're looking at?
Could be. It could be even younger players. We have to remember that the Premier League season doesn't start until September the 12th, sure. And the Community Shield is, 2 weeks out from that. The players have had a weird season. They've had a bit of a break. I think they're coming back this week to do, to start their preparation and their training, their physical training for the new season. So I suspect, and I don't think this will just be true for Arsenal, I think it will be true for Liverpool as well, that we could see very young teams playing the Community Shield, because I think the academy players from both sides will have been back a couple of weeks previously, so there might be a bit of experience. But I really don't think Mikel Arteta or Jurgen Klopp are going to risk any of their key players in a game which ultimately doesn't mean a thing.
That makes sense. Like in terms of recruitment then in midfield, Thomas Partey goes right to the top of that depth chart, doesn't he? It's in any other year, you can possibly make a case that Arsenal might find the 50 million quid. Is that the release clause that's required? And that would make reasonable sense. Despite, he's in his late 20s at this point, it's hard to see a club who have made 55 redundancies going out and spending 50 million quid this summer, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's one of the, it's one of the things which rankled about that announcement from Arsenal, is that they framed those 55 redundancies as necessary to keep investing in the team when the figures just don't add up. 50 million pounds on a player versus the couple of million it would have taken to keep those people in their jobs. You can't tell people those two things are connected in any way. You look maybe at Guendouzi and Torreira, and you could say they could, if you sold well, probably bring in most of that 50 million to pay Partey's release clause. The question, of course, is who's got the money to pay for those players. It's going to be a very restricted market. I think a lot of clubs are going to find it difficult to come up with transfer funds. We are going to see, I think, increasingly creative ways of moving players around, a lot of loan moves, a lot of swap moves. So it's whether or not Arsenal can find the funds for that particular transfer. He is a player that they like. He is a player that they want. Quite ironically, he is a player who the club have been targeting because Francis Kajigao provided a lot of reports and scouting on him before he was let go. So he's a scouting-based target. But whether they can do it or not really depends on what else they do in the market and who else they might be able to move on.
Yeah, I saw it reported in The Athletic that Arsenal are keen on him, and not least because they saw him playing for Mallorca. And it's kind of like, you've seen him playing for Atletico Madrid, who actually really cares how good he was at Mallorca. And I wonder if that's actually part of the way Arsenal are thinking right now, where it's like, we've put together a huge scouting department and we've had great intel, but we haven't exactly acted on it. I wonder, is that part of this, or
maybe? I mean, look, you can look back at some of the players that Arsenal have been linked with in the past and wonder at didn't you do it at a time when it was, Thomas Partey at Mallorca, for example, is a much more gettable player than Thomas Partey at Atletico Madrid. The classic example, of course, is Virgil van Dijk, somebody who Arsenal were absolutely interested in while he was at Celtic. And they were after central defenders, and they went and they brought in central defenders who weren't anywhere near that quality. Maybe the Van Dijk at Celtic wasn't quite the Premier League ready Van Dijk, but sometimes you've just got to take a punt on a player. What did he cost Southampton? Something like 12 million, maybe. And they sold him on to Liverpool for 70, 75, whatever it was. He was a player that Arsenal could have got if they'd wanted to, if they had maybe just pushed the button a bit earlier. I think there is a need. This is why the scouting thing would concern you. There is a need for Arsenal to maybe move for players more quickly than they might have in the past. The idea, is this guy ready for a team that is a top four challenger or a team that wants to challenge for the Premier League, which is where Arsenal's ambitions used to be. I think Arsenal are in a different place now. They just finished 8th and just scraped into the Europa League. It's the 4th successive season in the Europa League. Maybe you have to think about doing things differently about when you bring in players. And maybe you can soak up some of their development time and reap the benefits of it in a season or two, So it's not quite, they don't have to be quite as oven ready as they used to be.
For sure. Do they have a plan B if Thomas Partey is unaffordable?
I don't know. I mean, there's talk about a swap deal with a guy at Roma whose name escapes me right now. Lucas Torreira maybe going to Roma and this guy coming in. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, which is a shame. But there you go. But beyond that, I haven't really heard of any other targets, midfield targets that Arsenal have been after. I think they have to be creative. I think they're going to have to look maybe a little bit deeper through the leagues and perhaps even go down into the Championship and try and find some players who might be ready for the Premier League and come through there, because money is an issue. There's no question money is an issue. £50 million is a lot to spend on Thomas Partey. Also, there are issues, defensively that Arsenal have to figure out too, and they might be about to spend some money there as well. So,
is Diawara the Roma player?
Is it Diawara? Yes, I think so. I have it here somewhere. I should look it up. Yeah, I think what's his first name?
Amadou Diawara.
Yeah, that's the guy. So he could be an option, but again, this is going into the sort of deal that I was talking about, where it's essentially a swap deal. Maybe some money goes one way or the other, but you're giving Lucas Torreira the chance to go back and play in Italy, and you're bringing in a player without really doing a cash deal. So he could be an option, but quite what else they have up their sleeve, I don't know.
Let's talk about central defenders then, because there's quite a list here. David Luiz, Pablo Mari, Mustafi, Socrates, Saliba, Holding, Callum Chambers. Arsenal need to buy defenders, but they also need to sell a lot of them.
Yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. That is very, very true. They have a collection of central defenders who range from being adequate to not quite good enough. And that's an area in which they have to address. They have brought in Saliba from Saint-Etienne. He was brought in. Well, he was signed last season, but he spent the year on loan with his former club. He's part of the squad now, and there are very high hopes for him. But he is also 19 and just coming into the Premier League. I think we've seen experienced players and players with a certain amount of pedigree take some time to adapt to the Premier League. So there's a lot of expectation about Saliba, but hopefully people will give him the time he needs to develop and to learn about the Premier League. You know, in physical terms, he looks fantastic. You know, he's tall, he's strong, he's quick. He is the epitome of the modern centre half, if you like. What you need to be mobile, you need to be good on the ball, you need to be good in the air, you need to be physically strong. He ticks all of those boxes. Quite who's going to go out though remains to be seen. Mustafi and Socrates have less than a year left on their contracts, so that could mean they go for cheap. It could also mean that they decide to stay and see out the final year of their contracts. Callum Chambers is coming back from a cruciate ligament injury. Rob Holding played in the cup final, but hasn't necessarily been convincing. And you know, he's at a point in his career, I think, where Arsenal have to make a decision based on what they know about him and what they see from his performance levels, from the stats, from what it tells them. Is he going to make it? Is he going to make it? They have to make a decision now, I think. And if he's not, he might be somebody who's sold. You know, he's 24, 25 now, maybe. So he's not a kid anymore, really. They've enough information about him to make a decision. He is English. He could raise some funds. So I think probably 2 or 3 of those defenders could go.
Do you then see a constellation in that long list of names that could be a half-decent partnership for Arsenal, given the fact that they've got more time with Arteta now? They looked a little bit better at the end of the season than they did the first day out after the restart against Manchester City, which doesn't say much, I know, but he's a good coach. Let's not forget that these defenders are probably going to seem like better players after a bit more time with Arteta.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things will be what kind of formation he uses. Most of those defenders look more comfortable in a back 3 than a back 4. David Luiz in particular, I'm thinking of here, who in a back 4 gives me nightmares. In a back 3, he can still do that, but more often than not, he's very solid. He enjoys that position. He plays it very well. He's got lots of experience. It really depends what Arteta wants to do with his team and how he wants to set it up next season. One of the issues that Arsenal have had is a lack of creativity, and we touched on the Mesut Ozil absence earlier on. Part of that absence, I think, was because of the formation that Arsenal were playing. They didn't have that extra man in midfield. They didn't have that nominal number 10, if you like. So if Arteta wants to move to a back 4 and get that creativity further up the field, whether it's Ozil or a different player or somebody that they bring in, he's going to have to think very strongly about, you know, what kind of defenders he's got or what kind of defenders he's looking to bring into the club. They are very interested in signing Gabriel from Lille, who's a left-footed central defender who you might imagine could play on the left-hand side of a back 4, with perhaps Saliba playing on the right-hand side of that. that looks like it, potentially could be a new exciting partnership for Arsenal. But that could also be me projecting good things onto players who I haven't seen make countless mistakes for Arsenal defensively, like I have with most of the others, So it's kind of like, well, might as well give this a try because, everything else hasn't really worked.
There is nothing like a shiny new toy in the transfer market.
Sure.
Nothing beats it.
Yeah.
Fullbacks look pretty good, Andrew. Like, I mean, there's you're looking at even the depth in both positions as a position that they're fairly well stacked, and I think that is reflected by the lack of links to fullbacks this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only links have been to a couple of players who might go. One is, say, Kolasinac, who I think Arsenal are keen to move on. Whether they find a buyer for him, but I suspect he could head back to Germany, back to the Bundesliga. They do have depth, though, because Kieran Tierney is obviously a fantastic player. Hector Bellerin is there. Cedric Suarez. Again, one of those deals which raised a few eyebrows given the length of contract he got and the circumstances in which he arrived. But, a fairly solid Premier League player, at least in backup terms. Ainsley Maitland-Niles can play on the right, can play on the left. So I don't think there's any urgent need for a fullback. I think they can get through the season with what they have, and I would be surprised if there was any money spent there at all, given the sheer number of players who are there and the quality of some of the players who are there as well.
For sure. Goalkeeper really looks after itself. Martinez has been brilliant and is a more than capable number two. And like, there'll probably be a conversation about himself or Leno when Leno comes back, but you can't imagine he'll hold off Leno for too long. He was Arsenal's player of the season before getting injured.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you were to say, let's imagine we were mid-season and Leno comes back from his injury, can you drop Martinez? I don't know that you can. He really did take his chance very well. I think it's probably the best problem Arsenal have in terms of what they do with their squad. Having two very good goalkeepers seems like a good thing to me. At some point, there's going to have to be a decision, or at some point, one of them is going to be unhappy. But it's probably a better issue to have to worry which of my two good goalkeepers will I play, rather than, oh my God, I need to find another goalkeeper because neither of these two are good enough. I think Arteta will be quite happy with that side of his thinking. That's not one that's going to keep him up at night. What he does with central midfield, what he does in the center of defense, he might have some sleepless nights over that, but I think he can have a lot of trust in Martinez and Leno, of course, who was great before he picked up that injury.
The Arsenal depth chart between the sticks looking exceptionally well. Probably the first time I've ever uttered that about Arsenal Football Club. It's looking great. Yeah. So just to sum up in terms of the wish list for Arsenal, it's looking like the likes of Partey and Edouard, Diawara and Gabriel are the four players that Arsenal are really linked with. If they can get rid of Guendouzi, Torreira, Lacazette and Holding and drum up a bit of cash, you could definitely see those four transfers happening. Just on a final point, and feel free to wear your Arsenal heart on your sleeve at this point. Are you confident that the club are going to be able to pull off a successful transfer window as things ratchet up over the next little while? And are you confident of that being able to propel them into top four contention?
I'm confident that Mikel Arteta knows what he wants and knows what the team needs. Whether I'm confident that they can do all the deals that he really needs this summer, I'm not 100% sure on that. I feel like Arsenal have been through quite a lot over the last couple of years with the end of the Wenger era, the Unai Emery era, some of the things that have gone on around that. As a club, it's been fairly traumatic at times. There's been so much has happened this season and last season. But where there is confidence is in Arteta and the clarity of the vision that he has as a coach. I think he's more than a coach. I think he's the manager of Arsenal, even if that's not his official title. I think he talks like a manager and he behaves like a manager, thinks like a manager. And I think that's something Arsenal have needed. They need somebody with real vision, with an ability to communicate that to the players and to the supporters, and even perhaps communicate that to those on high as well, as to what is really required to get Arsenal back to something like the Arsenal fans want to see. You know, a team that is competitive, that can, you know, there's such a huge gap between the top teams in the Premier League and Arsenal right now. You know, Liverpool and City, and the top four would be a great achievement next season for Arsenal. I think that's what they've got to aim for, and what the ambition should be. But it feels like we have somebody at the helm who has the ability to convince players, which is important, and convince fans that he knows how to do it. Time will tell whether that's true or not, but it gives you something to believe in, it gives you something to hope in, and gives you a sense of optimism, which is something that I think has been missing for a little while. And when you go into a new season, you always want to feel that kind of childlike optimism, which I've had since the time I was a kid. Like, it's a new season, it's a fresh start, Arsenal can do anything. And then after a while, you realize that's not the case and you've been a fool. But, you know, it's nice to have that, at least going into the start of the new season. I hope that Arsenal can improve under Arteta. I hope that the club give him the backing he needs to make that happen. And if they do, it should make for an interesting season next season, you know? So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. Andrew Mangan of Arseblog, it's always great chatting to you and hearing your insights. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Thanks, Owen. Anytime.